Hi, anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam.
And my name is Kelly. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a New York legend, Bellevue Hospital, and some of the true stories of the oldest public hospital in the United States. But before we get into that, Sam, what is our question?
Well, at the moment of recording this, your birthday is right around the corner.
Oh, yeah.
Any happy birthday memories?
Oh, that's a good question. I was just thinking the other day about my 16th birthday, and it's the silliest memory, but it's so good. Like, where we lived, I don't know. Being in Chicago now, it's tragic for me because it's so hard to find the restaurant, the Melting Pot. Sam, do you know the Melting?
Yeah, it's like a fondue place, right? There's a few
Yes.
of them around here.
Maybe I haven't been searching hard enough.
I think they're more in the suburbs, not the
Yes,
city.
they're very like shopping centery vibe. I've always seen them kind of in like a place where you also might see like a White House black market.
Mm-hmm.
But where we were in the suburbs, this place was a little further into the suburbs, and it was like the fancy place. Like, this was like the place, like, this was high class Eden. And we, it was my 16th birthday, and they were like, okay, 16. Sounds like the melting pot, right? And I was like, hell yeah. Because I don't remember the first time I had fondue, but I remember how much I love fondue.
I don't think I've ever had like proper fondue.
Oh my gosh. I tickled to death every time I have it. And the only time they book up crazy is like around Valentine's Day because everybody gets the
Right.
same idea. Like, let's do something different for Valentine's Day. Let's get fondue. But this was just for like a birthday. So it was, I was thinking about it the other day because a couple of my childhood friends were there, and we just had a great time because basically you just sit around there and you have your oil bubbling in the middle of the table and you're cooking your food right in front of you. And for my friends who are celiac, they are celiac friendly at the melting pot.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yes, recently it was my little brother's birthday last year. He got to pick, like, yo, where you want to go to dinner. And Patrick was like, yo, where you think I want to go to dinner. And so we were there, and my sister-in-law has celiac disease. And because these pots are sort of segregated on different burners, you can speak to your
Mm-hmm.
waiter beforehand and you can ask them to have a segregated celiac burner
Oh,
where
that's nice.
yeah, so none of the food that goes in that pot that person orders is even brought to the table on the same tray.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so they'll bring like the meat and anything that has wheat in it and that kind of thing to the table, and then at the same time they'll serve like the meat and the veggies and whatever the celiac person has ordered. That way they're able to grill on their own grill with no. You just got to kind of watch for cross contamination so that nobody kind of plops a.
Yeah, that becomes your own responsibility at that point.
Right, you just gotta, talk to, and usually it's pretty easy for them, like, to just be like, this is celiac burner, and so
Right.
you learn pretty quick. But I thought that was nice too, that they handled it so wonderfully. Like, they had practically everything planned out, like, to the letter if somebody came who had celiac. So I thought that was very impressive.
Yeah, that's great.
The melting pot, man.
Yeah, I've never been to one.
Oh, we gotta go. They're good. They're good.
I've heard great things.
Yeah, they're fun. They're fun. It's just, you have your little fork and you're just cooking your meat, and at the beginning it's like a 3-course meal. You get like your cheese that gets to bubbling in front of you, and then you get your oil, which you actually do have to watch to make sure you're not like cooking the life out of your piece of chicken, and then you get your chocolate at the end where they bring you cake to dip in it and like strawberries.
Ooh,
It's so good.
fancy.
It's so good. Exactly. Doesn't it sound fancy? That's why we pick it for birthdays. We're like, you know what's fancy? The melting pot. Let's do that.
Right? Yeah, we didn't have any of those sorts of places
No,
up
yeah,
north.
that's true. You were far north for the melting pot. What was your? Do you have any happy memories that equate? Like, was there a spot you guys always picked for your birthdays, or like, did you guys go away do anything?
Not in Wisconsin, really. My birthday's around the holidays. My birthday's like right at Thanksgiving. So a lot of times we were traveling. But
Oh.
I do remember the birthday before I moved to Wisconsin. I actually moved like the week after my birthday to Wisconsin when I was 9.
Right,
And
because your parents are native Chicagoans, correct? Natives, quote unquote
Yeah.
natives.
yeah, well, the suburbs.
Yeah.
But yeah, they threw a huge birthday party for me before leaving, because this was going to be basically the last time I see a majority of my friends from the Chicago area. And they threw it at the gymnastics academy out in the suburbs. So we just had free reign over this gymnastics gym.
That sounds like so much
It was
fun.
awesome.
Did you guys get to jump into like the giant pit with the foam
yeah.
cubes? Oh,
There was
man.
the pit with the trapeze and the rings.
Oh.
And then there was a runway trampoline that led up to the pit. So you would run, but it has the spring back of the trampoline. So you like
Oh my God.
glide, and then you just throw yourself into the pit.
Oh
And
my
then they had
gosh.
this big maze thing in another room where it was trampolines on the top, but you could actually run through a maze that was underneath the trampolines.
Oh my gosh.
It was awesome.
This place
It was
is-
such a fun place to go to. It's the I think it's an Olympic gymnastics academy, but it's just like one of the many in the suburbs.
That's such a good idea, too, for a birthday
Yeah, and it was like
party.
we were 9. We were like the perfect age for it.
You're right. You're right. A 9-year-old, that's perfect. And also, maybe you're a parent and maybe you want to be like, okay, so all the kids got to jump into the pit of foam cubes. I would like a turn as well. I mean,
I
you
don't remember my
paid.
parents going in, but there's a good possibility they could have.
You could at least ask. Like, hey, listen, I paid for the party, so could I have a turn too? Because it looks like they're having a great time. Just
Right.
make sure their bodies are clear before my giant 33-year-old ass just sends on them. I'm turning 33, you guys. That's what that was.
I would say that's actually pretty close to the age my parents would have been when I was 9. They would have been 35.
You gotta clear the pool of all the children and be like, listen, my money's green. I want to turn.
Right.
But so Bellevue Hospital. Now, I'm going to go off script here a little bit. First of all, top up. Trigger warning for my friends who listen to this pod who do not like grim medical details in particular. I know there's a few of you who are into true crime and into that business, but medical is something totally different for you. So just a quick heads up. This is Bellevue Hospital, so a lot of this is going to be some medical stuff. And I also just wanted to give a shout out before we even start talking about it to healthcare providers everywhere. Like I, our friend of the pod, and the care that my father is getting in Cleveland from wonderful healthcare providers. And recently I got treated by a wonderful orthopedic doctor who, she was like our age, Sam.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're our age, and you're an orthopedic, like, doctor. But she was just, what a delight she was. She was like spinning all around in her desk chair, and she had my x-rays up on the board. And she just kept being like, oh, I don't see anything here that like we need to freak out about. I don't see any like tearing or fractures or breakages. It'd be one thing that if I saw something like that, I'd be like, oh shit, maybe we should get a shot in her arm. And she just kept cursing, and
Mm.
I loved every minute of
Makes
it.
you feel a little more comfortable.
I don't know how she saw it in me, but I think she was like, the cursing's making her much more comfortable. Because it's my first time that I myself had to go and get treated and kind of do it alone. And luckily it was just tendonitis, but I was in crazy pain. And so luckily, we were able to get there and get her help, because she has been awesome. And a lot of what we're going to talk about here in the beginning are some really, really cool young students who, again, are close to our age. Sam, they may be even younger than us, which is like, the brutal truth is they're definitely younger than me, because I'm 33.
Well, we're at the age where it's just like you never quite know, but there's a
Right.
good possibility people are younger than us.
Right.
Like,
And I'm like calling you sir. Like, I don't know. It's like, oh no. And so these students, so we're going to talk a lot first here. I owe my idea to this episode to a book I read, and it was called Life on the Line: Young Doctors Come of Age in a Pandemic. And I highly recommend giving it a read, but I'll break it down for you what happened, as it's one of the most recent crazy things Bellevue has been a part of. And we all know 2020 was the year the coronavirus, or COVID-19, began to peak in New York City. And I believe 2020 we may have seen the peak in the USA. I
probably.
cannot recall. I think it was surely very high, if not peaked in America in 2020. And as in New York City, of course, you're densely packed. You have so many people. And so as part of stemming this tide of overworked doctors and endless patients, New York City started a program which would shake up the final year medical students all over the city. So I don't know much about book learning as far as medical goes. I did my share. I went to college. I don't want to brag. I don't want to brag, but I did go to college. It was a state university, but it was not for medical. So I hit up a friend I had some of my notes from this book still left, but I also had to ask a friend when the path was cloudy for me from medical student to doctor. So I hope to kind of clear that up a little bit for you guys, because I know that I was confused.
Yeah, I don't really know the process well either.
No, I was like, I don't know what order they go in. I don't know how much school you do. I don't know anything about this. But one of my best friends he's got his doctorate, and he was able to straighten out for me sort of the order they go in, and I could match it up with what I learned from this book. And so what would happen is, as each young final year medical student is in school, they're waiting for match day. And they're all nervous because each young final year medical student picks hospitals around the city that they apply to and wait to see if they've been matched with their choices to start their residency and their first experiences as full doctors.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so when you graduate medical school, You are officially an MD. However, you are not able to privately practice then. You have to go to a hospital. And in this case, these kids are like, they've got 4 or 5 that are their top choices to do their residency in. And the resident, like all the resident doctors are managed by an attending physician or attending. My friend just called it the attending. I think he thought I was smart enough to know. I believe it would be attending physician or attending.
Yeah, well, it's basically going to be the doctor in charge of the
Right.
students.
Exactly.
So it's like
yes.
the established in-career doctor who's overseeing
Right.
them.
Yes. So, and how it goes with residency is you have, a period where you transition from being just like a new resident to being a senior resident. And when you're a senior resident, you've got a little more room to do things, but you're still reporting to this attending physician. And that is for the duration of however long your residency program may be. And then once your residency is over, you can open up private practice or you can stay in hospital work, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I was very confused. So that's kind of the journey that they all take, which I respect. That sounds like a long journey. And and this year was going to be crazy. However, 2020 would be entirely different. So 1 week after match day, it didn't there was never a date listed in the book of what day match day was. But 1 week after this day where the students requested their top schools, desperate for help, doctors and hospitals across the city asked for volunteer final year medical students to graduate early to help on the front lines of the COVID wards as New York was descending into a crisis state.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a wild ride, and it follows several young doctors who all answer the call to go into the COVID wards in 2020. And, a lot of them, you hear their personal stories, you hear their stories as a doctor. And of course, at the beginning, a lot of them are saying, like, my family wasn't sure if they were okay with me doing this, with me graduating early only to go into a COVID ward.
Right.
Yeah, when we're at the peak of
it's
an
a very
epidemic.
dangerous situation, yeah.
And not only that, graduating early alone is a big thing. Like, whoa, got to get ready for residency, got to go now. And then it's like, okay, not only are you getting ready for residency, you're all going to the COVID wards.
Right.
They were basically like drafted.
Right.
But, it was a volunteer basis. Like, drafted is the wrong word. And all these young doctors chose that. So they did describe, though, the haunting and sometimes nervous, laugh-inducing experience of reciting the Hippocratic Oath over Zoom rather than on stage. And I found that particularly... It's sort of the gallows humor of 2020.
Right. Like, we all can kind of relate to that at least at some point.
We can remember,
maybe not as extreme as reciting the Hippocratic Oath, but
right.
We all know that feeling and how weird it is.
Yeah, and how weird the world was at that moment. Like, now that we're in 2024, maybe some of us can kind of start to process 2020. That's what I'm working on. Working on it.
Well, I just even know, like, for me, honestly, similar to when 9/11 happened, I'm going to remember that moment that I was sitting in a room at work with everybody. We were all called down to the cafeteria to watch the news where they announced that Chicago was shutting down. And then the owner of the company came out being like, don't come back until we tell you.
Yep.
And that
Yep.
was
I
it.
I remember that too. I remember that because it was March, I think it was 13th. I think it was March 13th.
It was a Friday.
And the Pritzker wasn't Pritzker, it was like known all day. He was going to give an address about working from home.
Yeah, like 5 p.m.
So we literally, all of us at the place where I worked at the time, just stayed because we were like, we can't get home fast enough to watch this. So we hooked up the conference room TV up and watched JB Pritzker tell all of us to go home and not report tomorrow under any circumstances. And it was wild.
Yeah, so I think all of us can kind of relate to that feeling.
Yeah,
I can only imagine being a student during that time.
exactly. A young student, and a lot of them said that like the nervous laughing also came from like how their Zoom wasn't lining up. So some of them
Oh,
were on
right.
different, yeah, some of them were on different parts of the Hippocratic Oath than others because of their connection. And I was like that, if I don't know a 2020 statement, that is a 2020 statement right there.
Well, that's even the reason that you and I don't like video call when we record, because we don't record in the same place. So we're in different parts of the city
Yeah.
when we record. But we can't get good enough internet to line up our audios.
No,
So
and it's so
it's a
frustrating.
nightmare.
Yeah. And so imagine, yeah, so someday you and I are going to have doctors who are younger than us, for sure. They're graduating college
I'll say
right now.
that's going to happen
They're-
very soon if it's
very
not already
soon.
happening.
Yeah, it's going to happen. They're going to be younger than us, and they're going to say to us, like, yeah, I gave the Hippocratic Oath over Zoom, but none of us could get it lined up. It was pretty funny, and we're all going to be like, ha, that was the darkest chapter. Like,
Right.
and another thing that this did, however, was taking the oath over Zoom rather than on stage, where a person of honor would hood them, quote unquote, and essentially give them a special piece of their graduation uniform. And that is usually presented by a family member or someone of great importance to the graduating doctor. So after you accept your diploma, they put this, it's not even a hood really. It's like an extra piece that goes over like your standard graduation rig up.
Is it like
It's more like a neck piece.
I was gonna say, is it like one of those like I don't know. There is another name for them, but like if you graduate with honors, you can get them.
It honestly looks more to me like a shawl, like a short
Yeah,
shawl
that's what I'm thinking.
over your shoulders. And I think that's why they call it hooding them, because you can't really put a shawl on, like, and hood, I guess hooding sounds better than shawling. I don't know.
Well, there's probably another like historical significance that makes more sense if we dug into it.
I'm sure that there used to be maybe a different uniform, a different outfit. Either way, this is still part of the ceremony that is commonly happening for a graduating doctor. And it's 2020, however, and that's not happening. So, and that made me sad. I felt bad. One young man lamented that his mother missed her chance to give him his hood at his graduation, but she was supportive of him going into the wards.
Maybe they can try to have a equally important celebration
Yeah, I hope
once
so.
this is all over.
I hope so. It would, or like, honestly, I'm not sure how you award doctors distinctions, but it does seem like something that you should get like I don't know, I can only equate it to like a military service kind of thing. Like you should get like a little silver bar you get to wear on your white coat if you graduated early to serve in the COVID wards. I feel like.
Oh, yeah. Maybe certain hospitals will do that. Like, who knows?
Maybe. Yeah, or maybe they all got it. Maybe they do have them, they just don't wear them on their things. Because honestly, most people who I've met who are medical doctors of high importance have placed very little conversation on the fact that they're medical doctors. Like, it just sort of comes up, like, all of a sudden, and then they're like, oh, yeah, no, I know, I'm a surgeon. And you're like, whoa, you're a surgeon?
Yeah, but, like, you also think about it. This is their everyday life. To us, that's something that's like, wow, like, you worked really hard to get there, but they've been doing that for years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just, like, nothing new.
Yeah, exactly. They've been working and working and working at this, you know? And so it's deserving, I think, of a little pomp and ceremony and a hooding. And hopefully, yeah, they can do something for these folks. But I'm sure that, like I said, I'm sure they may have already. But many of these newly minted residents were sent to some of the largest and oldest hospitals in the city, called the, quote, epicenter of the epicenter, including Montefiore and Bellevue, which we're talking about today. And each of these young people described the eerie sensation of being given their first patients and monitoring them. But they all needed certain clearances, given that they were only residents and not fully formed medical doctors. So, like, this is all about the attending doctor and that sort of thing again. So they would have to get special permissions from the attending or from a senior resident. And there were a lot of roadblocks to them for caring for these people. So They were sort of largely kept kind of at a screen, watching their patients, monitoring their vitals outside of the rooms. And they would have to request of the attending or the senior residents, like, hey, I'm going into X room. I will need this kind of PPE. May I enter X room to meet my patient?
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, some of them mentioned, though, having to kind of put their foot down a little bit and be like, no, I want to be in the room with the person. I want to greet them. I want to tell them I'm going to care for them. So, yes, I'm going to enter the room and respect.
Right. Yeah, and that has to be hard because you have to balance, like, you want to give that good bedside manner in that way, but at the same time, our country was in such a crisis where we also weren't having the protective materials we needed.
Right.
So is that considered a waste to go in and do that greeting because you're using those materials?
Exactly. And how do you weigh that? Like, that must weigh so much on your mind. Because I remember those early days where every hospital was just begging for any PPE and for people to stop buying it up from the stores because people were just buying it everywhere and there wasn't enough for healthcare practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
And so at Bellevue, one of the young graduated students would watch his patients, and he would often have to call codes on them, meaning that all the staff should rush to this patient. And in the book, it was unclear if, as a resident, you are to be in the room during a code, because they're technically your patient, but really what you're doing when you're calling the code is you're calling for the higher up doctors to all get to this room.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them mentioned, though, that they would get the higher up doctors to this room and would remain sort of in hallway space out of the way because they did know it was their patient. And we knew so little about the pandemic at this point. The student at Bellevue related a story where he was speaking with a patient that he had kind of bonded with. The man had been in the hospital for a little while, and he seemed to be improving. He was no longer intubated, and he was speaking, ready to go home. And the young doctor went home that evening, only to return the next day and find out that his patient had unexpectedly nosedived and been driven into a condition so dire that he had passed away overnight.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, the young doctor, he's at Bellevue. He said this could happen at any time, though this was the time he was most shocked. And I can't imagine that. Like I can't imagine being kind of on the front lines there when we knew nothing about people, why people were just dying.
Right, and just how fast it all happened.
And yes, yeah, how fast it could. Oh, God. However, this is all modern day Bellevue, and some of the most recent terrifying stories to come out of its wards. But as I said in the intro, Bellevue is actually one of the oldest public hospitals in the United States. I'm going to refer to it just as Bellevue for brevity's sake, but it's also known as NYC Health Plus Hospitals slash Bellevue, and it was formerly called Bellevue Hospital Center. It opened on March 31st, 1796.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I saw that date in my research, and I was like, wow, that really is. And it's also one of the largest hospitals in the United States. And currently, it holds a 25-story patient care facility housing more than 800 inpatient beds and 6 intensive care units. It has a world-renowned emergency service and trauma center and a 6-story modern ambulatory care pavilion. So this place is huge.
Right. I say that's a lot.
Yeah, like 800 inpatient beds and then 6 intensive care units. You have another for emergency and trauma, and then 6 stories of ambulatory care. This place is huge. And it is and has been located at 462 First Avenue in the Kips Bay neighborhood of Manhattan, New York City since 1796. Bellevue is also home to FDNY EMS Station 08, formerly NYC EMS Station 13. Shout out firefighters. Mm-hmm. Bellevue is also a safety net hospital, providing health care for individuals regardless of their insurance status or their ability to pay. And it handles over 500,000 patients each year. So I did not know that. Like, I did know, like, I mean, obviously.
I've heard of hospitals that don't do that, which just, like, I get it, but at the same time, I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll talk a tiny bit about private healthcare systems and how they influenced how Bellevue operated, being a public hospital. But this place it's not just public, it's anybody can, regardless of insurance status, regardless of your ability to pay.
It's important just to have health care. And sometimes it's incredibly hard to pay for it.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, man. Like, I have friends who are getting jobs that don't have health care attached to them. And that stuff's expensive. Mm-hmm. And so Bellevue is and has been operating on this principle since it opened. However, historically, it was not considered a badge of honor or that you were receiving life-saving care. In the past, it was so frequently associated with the treatment of mentally ill patients that the term Bellevue, quote, became a pejorative slang to mean any psychiatric hospital.
So honestly, that's the way I've heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll hear, there were a lot of mentally ill people treated here. There were and are. However, yeah, it did become slang in the lexicon that any kind of psychiatric or like nerves hospital, they would be like Bellevue. All the way to its beginning, though, Bellevue started as a farm. Bellevue. It was just 2 words, like the French. I think it means beautiful view. I'm really sorry to my 5 years of French teacher. But it was 2 words, Bellevue. And in 1798, the city purchased it. This was a property on the East River, several miles north of the settled city at the time. So, but we all know this is New York City. So, at the time, it was, pretty far out there. They thought they were good because it was during this period in history, it was being used as quarantine for yellow fever patients in outbreaks.
So they obviously want it further away from the city.
Exactly. So right now they're like, okay, we're definitely far, they're far out there. And we'll see that, obviously New York City grows and changes, and Bellevue will be there. And it was formerly named Bellevue Hospital in 1824. So Bellevue started in the time of another serious outbreak. Yellow fever reached epidemic proportions 3 times in 1795, 1799, and 1803, claiming thousands of lives over the course of its presence in New York City. Upon infection, most victims would experience headaches, followed by severe exhaustion, high fever, and slowed heart rate.
It's crazy. 3 times.
Yeah, yeah. And just think thousands of lives just in New York City.
Oh, right.
They're just sort of pushing these people out to pasture. Because at this point, it's not even formally named a hospital until a few years, some change years after one of the peaks of yellow fever. But we'll see, this is sort of a pattern with Bellevue, as it is a pattern with society, like epidemic and pandemic diseases sort of come and go. But Bellevue gets really hammered by them, partially because it's a public hospital,
Mm-hmm.
And Bellevue's status as a safe haven hospital often brought it trouble, especially from private facilities, like I said. The contrasts between the public mandates of Bellevue and the private privileges of New York Hospital were stark. Quote, by law, private hospitals can unload on Bellevue, and Bellevue must receive them, end quote. David Oshinsky, a professor of history at New York University and the director of the Division of Medical Humanities at NYU's Langone Medical Center, writes, and for much of the following research, I'm indebted to his book, Bellevue, 3 Centuries of Medicine and Mayhem at America's Most Storied Hospital. So Dr. Oshinsky writes quite a lot about Bellevue. And it's awesome because he's giving us a really good window into what it looked like.
Well, even just like that quote, like you can kind of just imagine that now with the fact that we've been through a pandemic and that like
Yeah.
hospitals just you got to take patients if at all
Right?
possible, and
Right.
how when hospitals are full it makes it really hard to help people.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you're public like this and you only have so many beds. And I just remember it was a constant thing on the news, like bed counts. And oh my God, how scary that was. Like, oh my God, we have like no beds in this. It's, oh God, I just remember that being one of the things I was always like terrified by. So, New York Hospital, what they would do is sort of in historically, they would turn away, quote, drunks, vagrants, and those with smallpox, the itch, and contagious distempers, or in what is known as, quote, patient dumping. It would redirect its sickest patients to Bellevue, and it allegedly did it well into the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're like, you seem pretty ill. We're gonna just boot you over to Bellevue. You'll be fine.
Like there's like potentials of like maybe they didn't have doctors that specialized in whatever the needs are, but like we just said, that puts such a strain on other hospitals.
Yeah, and I think at this point, we're starting to see a population density problem too. Like, oh wow, there are a lot of people here. Maybe we need to start building more hospitals. Like, ooh, we need to start getting, because, around this, as we go through this timeline, there'll be several hospitals built in New York. Oshinsky wrote a little bit about them. I didn't look too deeply into them, but I know that several Catholic and religious affiliated hospitals were built as well. So certain patients preferred to be treated there.
Right.
But in this case, New York Hospital has the reputation of just get patient dumping its sickest patients at Bellevue. And at the same time, Bellevue was seeking to protect a swelling immigrant community that was largely housed in tenement buildings, which meant continued spread of disease.
Mm-hmm.
And, quote, in 1870, one child in 5 in New York City would not live to see one,
Oof.
Oshinsky writes. And, quote, 25% who reach adulthood would not live to 30.
I mean, I'm back at that point.
That's 1870.
Yeah, I would say
yeah, it's not great.
There's a point where it's like we know that the lifespan was quite limited, but even for
Right.
1870, that's rough.
That's pretty bad. One child in 5 in New York City would not live till 1. That's
We've been just in general living to 30. Like, that's incredibly young, even for 1870.
Yeah. So it speaks to a little bit of what we're going to talk later about a badass lady who I can't wait to talk about. But yes, the numbers are incredibly bad, and I'm sure it's not helping sometimes when we're entering some of these facilities, depending on their protocol. But in 1787, Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons had assigned faculty and medical students to Bellevue. Columbia faculty and students would remain at Bellevue for the next 181 years until the restructuring of the academic affiliations of Bellevue Hospital in 1968.
I really thought that you were saying, like, they were there for residency. I'm like, that's a long residency.
Damn! Did they ever make it out of residency?
I was like, wow. You're just talking about short lifespans.
Yeah, like, oh, yeah. It was so sad. He died in residency. Never made it to private
He was
practice.
about 200 years old. No big
Yeah.
deal.
He would have been the oldest doctor practicing. We were so looking forward to it. But in this case, multiple students for 181 years. That's very funny. And so New York University, they follow suit in 1819. They start setting up the faculty members and students to remain at Bellevue. So we're starting to see sort of some structure happening in here. And in 1849, an amphitheater for clinical teaching and surgery opened. In 1861, the Bellevue Hospital Medical College, which was the first medical college in New York with connections to a hospital, was founded.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we'll see. There's a ton of firsts with Bellevue, obviously because it's been around forever. But this was the one was the most exciting for me to get to, because by 1873, Bellevue was the nation's first nursing school based on Florence Nightingale's principles opening at Bellevue.
Oh, wow.
Yes, Florence Nightingale, the revolutionary nurse who pioneered several medical treatments, including a lot of germ prevention. So, sort of, Bellevue is becoming this place that's the first in a lot of stuff. And being that they opened with Florence Nightingale's model, it was a big deal. She was very highly regarded in the medical community. And then it was followed by the nation's first children's clinic in 1874. And so, leading to a little bit of the slang, another opening was a pavilion for the, quote, insane at the time. Insane was the term. And there's a lot of, however, at this time in history, there is a ton of words for being mentally ill. And, you know, they're just a ton, like ranging from like nerves to like full on crazy, full on wackadoo, like the
Yeah, well, there was such a lack of understanding that it was scary.
exact.
And it was like almost assumed it could be contagious, even though it's clearly not.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there was just such a fear of it that it just was called some truly terrible things.
Yeah, and this pavilion that they built is an approach that was considered revolutionary at the time for exactly those reasons, because a lot of hospitals just straight up didn't have this, and this was erected in 1879. So they're the first to really set up an area for the mentally ill to be treated. And that's why we get the slang, Bellevue. For that reason,
Right.
yeah, for that reason, the name Bellevue is sometimes used as slang for psychiatric hospitals. Mark Harris in New York called it, quote, the Chelsea Hotel of the Mad.
I feel
End
like I've
quote.
heard that as well.
Yes, so Bellevue gets quite a rap for treating mental illness, and that's kind of short-sighted for everything that they do, because when you think about that whole list that I just read of everything they did first, like, but their pavilion for the insane is what people remember them for. Like, that kind of sucks. like
Right.
like there were
They've done
also
a whole lot more than that, and that was a
right
huge step that
right that wasn't
needed
done.
like help for people who previously were turned away.
Exactly, it straight up wasn't done.
Might not have
And
been really the best help in the world because they still didn't understand
right.
mental illnesses, but it was an attempt, often terrible attempts, but an attempt.
Right, they're trying to work it out, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But they're trying to work it out, and they're one of the first groups of people who are saying, like, hey, this is a thing, and we straight up need like a unit of people dedicated to this thing.
Right.
So I also just think it's really cool that they were the first nursing school based on Florence Nightingale's principles. And like, that's revolutionary in itself, because we're going to go back into the history a little bit. That's why I warned y'all for the medical details. We're going to go back into history a little bit and see kind of things that may have happened before Nightingale's ideals were adopted. And just as often, Bellevue proved its own worst enemy, as both disease and mismanagement frequently overran the institution. Oshinsky writes, there was never a time when Bellevue appeared even remotely trouble-free. In the 1848 to 49 epidemic of typhus, or, quote, Irish fever, a bacterial disease that, quote, thrives in close, filthy quarters and is spread by body louse, the patient death rate at Bellevue topped 40%.
Wow.
Yeah. Apparently, it was even worse for the staff.
Which, sadly, it doesn't surprise me because, again, there's so many things that they just didn't fully understand.
Right.
Or have the tools to properly help and care for.
Right. Or say, they don't have the communication with the rest of the country, yet as perfectly as we do, to be like, oh, this is epidemic, oh, this is pandemic, but Bellevue is still receiving just waves and waves of patients in various pandemics. And
Well, imagine they didn't even have like the ability to call each other on the phone
no,
for all of this, and so they're waiting for somebody to show up at the door and tell them what's happening,
right,
or a letter to show up, something like it's not just an easy communication, like talking to an expert in another country like we can now.
right. And like, even like maybe waiting for a cable from someone from New York, like in this case, 100 more dead in typhus epidemic, like, to Chicago, and Chicago gets it, like 2 weeks later or however long it takes, and then by then who knows. So in this case,
Like, hopefully the mail can beat the
yeah,
the disease that's going around.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the 1850s, guys, this is a little gross. Heads up, skip ahead, skip ahead, skip ahead. In the 1850s, a sensational story spread of Bellevue's rat infestation as a woman was discovered in a hospital bed with a lifeless child whose face had been eaten by vermin.
Oh.
It was determined to be posthumously. Just just throwing that out there. Just throwing that out there. A physician observed, quote, I immediately examined and found a child beneath the hips of the mother in a lifeless condition and mutilated, apparently by rats. The nose, the upper lip, and a portion of the cheek seemed to be eaten off. The toes of the left boot and a portion of the foot were eaten off, or apparently so. The lacerated portions were covered with sand and dirt. End quote.
Oof.
Yeah. So this is still kind of the environment we're dealing with. Not at all like a hospital-y germaphobe,
Right.
you know.
Like, it's 1850s.
Right, exactly.
Rat
They're
infestation.
just trying to keep people alive. They're like, "Yo, you think a shot of whiskey would fix you?" And you're like, "Maybe." And they're like, "Okay, try." I don't blame them.
Right? Like, drink this and go home.
Right, yeah. I'm so sorry that you feel sick. Try some cocaine. Like,
Right, basically.
I actually, in the collection, I know I talk about this a lot on the podcast, but I have a prescription from the, it's either 17 or the 1800s for cocaine and morphine and laudanum.
Yeah, I think if I remember, it was the 1800s,
Yeah.
like early 1800s, I think.
So this person was doped up and coked out. Like,
Right?
that slip of paper in my cabinet says, like, coke out this guy when he wakes up and then dope him up enough until he goes to sleep.
Right. It's crazy to think about that.
I know. And there's even memes about it. You know, you see it online, like, doctors in the 1800s, like, oh, well, you've got ghosts in your blood. You should do some cocaine about it.
Right.
But it's funny that we're speaking about that because Bellevue also initiated a residency training program in 1883 that is still the model for surgical training worldwide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they really were developing this healthcare system. And so our young COVID ward residents would have maybe followed some of their exact guidance. They also founded the first men's nursing school in 1888. By 1892, Bellevue established a dedicated unit for alcoholics.
Oh, wow.
Yes, another very foresightful thing in 1892.
Yeah. So I don't think I've really heard at that time treatment for alcoholism.
Yeah, back then it seemed like it was kind of just like a thing that some people were known to have.
Yeah. And it's just like, leave them alone. They'll find another bottle somewhere and
Exactly. They'll peter
fall
out.
asleep in an alley.
Yeah. We'll sweep them off the front porch tomorrow, you know? So this is them recognizing, like, again, hey, this is a problem over here. We need a space for this. But it could be another reason that Bellevue picked up the reputation that it did.
Yeah.
In 1902, the Administrative Bellevue and Allied Hospitals Organization were formed by the city under President John W. Brannan. B&AH also included Grosvenor Hospital, Harlem Hospital, and Fordham Hospital. So they're forming this medical system through the city now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and this is at the point the city is growing a lot. This is over 100 years
Yes.
since the hospital was established.
Right. This is 1902. Yes. And so B and AH also were the first to open their doors to female and black physicians. So,
Oh, wow.
shout out there, yes.
Yeah.
And then, in the midst of a tuberculosis epidemic, a year later, the Bellevue Chest Service was founded. So Bellevue stood again against a terrifying epidemic, this time tuberculosis. So they're really just getting swept away with all of this. And, I think the founding of like the general hospital system speaks to how fast this city is growing. So I think that that could be part of it, tuberculosis might spread a lot easier if you're living in some of the first apartment buildings,
Mm-hmm.
However, so for better or for worse, in 1887, so a few years back, a young reporter named Nellie Bly, who you might know, she feigned insanity and she was involuntarily committed to the city's system of institutions for the mentally ill. It should be mentioned at a completely different institution.
Okay, so not Bellevue.
Not Bellevue. She was not anywhere near a Bellevue. She was at a facility. She was at a hospital. And she is getting this data. Her story becomes 10 Days in a Madhouse. And it's published in New York World. And this story became a sensation for its depiction of brutality and neglect. I sort of knew of Nellie Bly just through reading certain stories. One was Brain on Fire. A young woman, she has this mental condition that none of the doctors can really understand. And they think at first it's some sort of mental illness, and she tells a little bit of the story of Nellie Bly. So she's depicting all this brutality and this neglect, yet while her tale mainly focused on the city's asylum on Blackwell's Island, which is now Roosevelt Island. So she's in an entirely different place. But for some reason, the psychiatric unit of Bellevue also became associated in the subsequent public scandal and investigations, cementing a, quote, connection between Bellevue and insanity.
So it just kind of, sounds like the media just kind of rode the already, the status that Bellevue already had.
Yeah.
And just kind of associated them together, even though they weren't.
Yeah, and probably encouraged a lot of these other private institutions to patient dump toward them. Like, oh, he seems insane, send him to Bellevue,
Right.
So like I said, the story did not revolve around Bellevue. But nevertheless, it made everyone skittish. And the mentally ill were approached with a very nervous temperament. I imagine especially by New Yorkers that live near Bellevue, knowing that it was a large center for the mentally ill. And as we've said here, it's because it was poorly understood. But also, at least we have Bellevue who has developed this center for the problem. But here is where we get into some of the darker episodes of Bellevue, which have persisted into modern times. In 1989, a, quote, homeless cocaine addict named Stephen Smith, who had been released from psychiatric care against his wishes at Bellevue, took up residence in the machinery closet of the hospital's 22nd floor.
That's probably not good.
No. Again, we just did the one episode, the Gustafsons. Again, hiding in walls. I don't like it. It. And he's in a machinery closet, and he's wearing a stolen doctor's scrubs. He's he has a stolen stethoscope and security badge, and so he's free to just roam the hospital
Uh-oh.
because he's sort of purloined all this stuff from people. And so what he does when he's able to roam the hospital is he enters the office of Dr. Catherine Hinnant, who was 5 months pregnant, and over 20 minutes, quote, beat her unconscious, raped and sodomized her, and strangled her to death with an electrical cord.
Oh my God.
Yes. The investigation was called, quote, the Beast of Bellevue. And this investigation uncovered, quote, at least 3 reports of unauthorized persons living in the 4th floor locker room, and at least 5 reports of persons sleeping in other common areas in the stairways around the hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that's more modern. One.
Also, the Beast of Bellevue is a cool sounding name. Don't give somebody like that a cool sounding name. Yeah, like that's not fair.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good band name that has been taken. Like, whack. And so still these incidents to the contrary, Bellevue's reputation as an out-of-control hospital for the mentally ill might be exaggerated, argues Oshinsky. Quote, Bellevue's hold on our popular imagination has come at a price, he writes. He goes on to say the relentless focus on its eccentricities have obscured its role as our quintessential public hospital. Bellevue was a leader in psychiatric research and treatment, he maintains. Yet here again, the hospital eventually became embroiled in controversy. So, recognizing a connection between seizure and the treatment of schizophrenic symptoms, which were still not fully understood, Bellevue inaugurated the practice of electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT.
I know they had some practices that weren't great.
Yes. Quote, thousands would undergo ECT at Bellevue. Again, by Oshinsky. Quote, many of them children. Indeed, few units employed it as systematically. However, Bellevue largely abandoned ECT after its lead practitioner, the child neuropsychiatrist Loretta Bender, left for Creedmoor State Hospital in 1956, where her psychiatric research turned to the experimental use of LSD. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, Bender was an irregular doctor, to say the least. And as always, though, research into depression continues, even sometimes still involving LSD.
Yeah, I know that LSD and mushrooms are definitely still used as like microdosing a lot of the time.
I'm hearing more and more about it.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, I think it because of a lot of these controversies and these things that were truly terrible, I think it got kind of bundled in with that, and people are recently starting to re-explore that idea. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's really benefit to it. I don't think that I've seen enough studies to prove it to me, but they're looking into it.
I agree, because I don't know. But the research continues. I know because Instagram keeps targeting me and trying to get me to take ketamine, and I'm not going to do it.
Oh boy.
And it's just me then.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like every other sponsored post. It's like, ketamine changed my life. And I'm like, what the hell is this? I don't think we're supposed to be taking this.
I've never seen that.
Yes. Yeah, it pops up on my feed all the time. Like, Instagram is like a drug dealer desperate for me to take ketamine. It's so weird.
Oh my goodness.
But, regardless, so by the same token, there are drawbacks here. Because ECT, it was viewed as a better, safer option. But it resembled, quote, the fictional experiments of Mary Shelley's Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Thou- yeah. Thousands were subjected to it via strong electrical currents to the head, turning patients into, quote, amiable vegetables. These are still the early days of ECT, though, and the side effects were poorly understood. However, ECT treatment is still used today, with the side effects being more minor and the patients improving. In this case, in 1942, Dr. Bender, in the children's ward at Bellevue, subjected more than 100 children, some as young as 4 years old, to regular ECT.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that wild? And she did this backed by generous funding from U.S. Public Health Services.
Oh, it just makes me think when I was going through all of my health stuff as a kid, how would that have been treated back in the day?
God almighty, it would have been so scary.
Yeah, like I dealt with migraines starting at 3 years old. How would they have treated that in the 40s?
Yeah, if you were holding your head regularly, and so you never at this time, she's literally doing it to children as young as 4. Like, ooh. And her practices backfired on her 12 years later. When it emerged, her experiments had done more harm than good to the children she had, quote, treated.
It's sad that it took 12 years to realize that.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, also, God, 4 years old, ECT. Jesus. It's about to get worse, though, guys. Because prior to ECT, experimental convulsive therapy with insulin made its U.S. debut at the hospital in the 1920s to treat patients in the, quote, disturbed wards.
The insulin?
Yeah. This involved injecting high doses of a chemical stimulant that caused, quote, explosive seizures capable of breaking bones, but
Ooh.
doctors considered it an effective way to calm the deeply disturbed.
Oh, really? Okay.
They considered it that. I don't know that I would. I'm not
I'll say I definitely don't.
Yeah, I don't think explosive seizures capable of breaking bones seem to be the most effective way
That doesn't equal calm.
in my humble
Like,
BFA's opinion. Anything that causes a seizure that might break my bones, I don't know if is successful. I don't know.
Nope.
And Bellevue psychiatrist Joseph Wartis never discussed the risks with patients and didn't stop administering the insulin shock therapy despite complaints of bad headaches, shakes, and no positive results from the treatment.
No positive results.
None.
My goodness.
None. So, yeah. So, first they're just injecting people with insulin, and then they realize, like, oh, this has 0 positive results. So, we're going to switch to ECT, but we overshoot it a little bit. We swing the other way a little bit too far, and then we're giving ECT to 4-year-olds.
Right.
So, you see it kind of swinging back and forth here. And at the same time, Bellevue continued to pioneer and provide care as it was confronted with a new illness beginning in November 1980 when, quote, a man arrived at Bellevue with a fever and a shortness of breath. Detecting pneumocystis, pneumonia, with profound cellular immunodeficiency, a team that included doctors Fred Valentine, Alvin Friedman Kine, and Linda Laubenstein, raced to understand the nature and vectors of a new urban epidemic. Originally called, quote, gay cancer, and then called gay-related immune deficiency, GRID, the disease was eventually renamed acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS. So we're having another pattern, another pandemic, another people are dying all around us, our friends, our loved ones. I know several people who just said like it was like a generation of people disappeared.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, and they just truly didn't know it's Bellevue again against this new thing. And even Oshinsky says, even as nobody knew what precautions to take or how long the epidemic would last, Bellevue became the epicenter of the spreading epidemic as it served both the gay neighborhoods of Greenwich Village and the drug plagued streets of the Bowery and the Lower East Side. The heroics of the city's medical professionals, many of them involved with Bellevue, became the subject of Larry Kramer's play The Normal Heart, which is a very good play. I read it in college, and
I don't think I know that one.
yeah, if you ever get a chance to see it, it's very. I mean, it's prepare your heart because it's wrenching. And just to hear, the original terms for HIV or AIDS, it's just like so icky and like
It blows my mind that wasn't that long ago.
no 1980.
Like that really wasn't that long ago.
No,
Um,
no,
like
and
those terms, like unfortunately, some people would choose to use those terms nowadays, but they would
yeah,
not be. Something would not be named like that
no, no,
publicly.
absolutely not. It's like a lot of the really shitty, really racist nicknames that people, including the president at the time, gave COVID. It smacks of that.
Right.
Because there were mean, shitty, racist names that floated around during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And just like this, it's just another wave crashing onto Bellevue. Because again, public hospital. And so like he's saying, they're serving all the way from Greenwich Village to where you're dealing with drug users who can also get the disease, only they may not know that yet. So they're
Right.
dealing with all these various communities that can contract this, only, we just simply don't know the spread, which is always the story. So, to explain a little further, though, a lot of what we talked about, Oshinsky's involved in a lot of this. And I have to say that he does okay at it reads a little rosy, but he does reveal some of the darker sides of Bellevue. There are stories, here we go, guys, with the medical. Hang on tight. There are stories of experimental procedures on unconsenting patients. And as we discussed before, the electroconvulsive therapy being applied to children. David Oshinsky reveals scores of bizarre experiments carried out on people, including an early facial reconstruction operation to create a nose made out of a patient's middle finger.
Interesting. Don't
Yeah,
imagine that's gonna work.
yeah, I don't know where that idea came from, but I guess maybe there weren't that
Someone
many in
had
the
it.
room. I was going to say, I guess there weren't that many in the room, huh? He also said, in a rather horrifying and medieval procedure, that doctors also injected boiling hot tobacco juice into the arm of a pregnant woman who is suffering from cholera.
What is that supposed to do?
Exactly. I'm like, why?
No.
My main question here is why? Why?
And like, why would that be a thought?
Right, like this would be a good idea. We'll just, boil that stuff that we
Oh,
smoke in our pipes, put it into a
that'll
syringe,
kill
inject
me
it.
sooner than later.
Yeah, inject it into a pregnant woman who has cholera. Like, what? Okay. What?
I am glad I do not live in this day of medicine.
Right? Because Oshinsky also reveals medical staff working at the facility in their early days held their poorer, chronically ill patients, quote, too near to the grave to care, end quote. Yes.
Oh boy.
Yeah. He also elaborates on the schools sending students to Bellevue when it became a training center for U.S. medicine, because this began a practice we've seen in history with eager young doctors snatching corpses from graveyards to dissect for study.
Yeah, that was a pretty common thing for a while.
Yep, sure was. Grave Robin.
Bodies were expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Just we have never covered them, but H.H. Holmes, if any of you
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
looked into him, you would definitely know what people would go through to get a body.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because the supply is just far too limited in this time in medical history. And also, we're going to find where the two paths come together of psychosis and potential murder and Bellevue in the story, besides the one before, which was also psychosis and murder. And Oshinsky writes, quote, in the anatomy room were found 3 fresh corpses, one boiling in a kettle, 2 others cut up with certain parts of the 2 sexes hanging up in a most brutal position. End quote. So yeah.
Don't really want to know what they're planning here.
Me neither, because and it's good that we don't, because the dissectors were sent to jail.
Good.
Yeah, definitely. It is said that the sick practice was still going on 60 years later, with New York's medical schools relying on grave robbers to meet, quote, anatomical needs. And I don't want to Google more what that means. I don't want to know. I'm really
Surface
good.
level, I'm fine.
I'm really good with it just being anatomical needs. Overcrowding was also a huge issue at the hospital, prompting the construction of a new complex close by in the 1840s. However, nothing could stop the tide of indigent patients in the growing New York City. As a result, rat infestations became rife, with the hungry pests occasionally feasting on the flesh of sick babies. Patients were even hoarded into baths, with one visitor in 1860 witnessing 60 people washing in a single tub.
Oh my god.
Right, that sounds terrible, like horrific. And also, my husband makes fun of me for taking one bath in one tub. So this
There's
is
nothing wrong with that.
This is 60
in one
people.
tub.
Yes.
That's a different story.
Yeah, y'all, like, let's just count out, like, let's use an abacus and just move the beads to how many people 60 is in a single tub. And the New York Times also reported on the horrifying vermin problems, quoting an affidavit from a Bellevue physician, quote, myriads swarm at the waterside after nightfall, crawl through the sewers, and enter the hospital. Ugh.
Gross.
Ugh. Yeah. And also in these early days, many operations were performed without anesthesia, with gallstones and even testicles removed.
Yeah, that can't be comfortable.
No anesthesia, testicles removed. Every man who listens to this podcast is like grabbing his crotch desperately right now. Like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It was said, quote, instruments slicing through human flesh and bone while the patients were awake, sedated only by swigs of whiskey.
Yeah, I don't think that was
Ugh.
uncommon,
Yeah,
though. I
no.
think
I
anesthesia
don't
is a
think
pretty new thing.
it is. Yes. And so, yeah, it used to be that it's just like, hey, you bite down on this piece of leather, we're gonna give you stitches. And poor hygiene was also widespread among the surgeons, most likely prior to Florence Nightingale's procedures they adopted. And prior to that, the surgeons rarely washed their hands or sanitized their surgical tools, transferring deadly particles from the morgue to newborn babies.
Like I said earlier, I'm glad I live in this time of medicine
Yeah, me too.
versus then.
Me too. Also, uh, like, are you just using the same? What surgical tools? I don't want to know. What surgical tools are you
The answer
bringing
is
to the
yes.
morgue?
The answer is unfortunately yes.
Yeah. What are you taking to the morgue and also to a newborn baby? Like, I don't want to know which surgical tools were transferring particles from a morgue to a newborn baby. Like,
I'm sure there were plenty.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, what, bro? Are you just carrying this around in your pocket? And the answer is probably. At the beginning, the newly installed children's ward saw problems as well. Former patients have told horror stories of their time at Bellevue, including Ted Shabazinski, who at age of 6 was subjected to ECT at the hands of Dr. Bender in 1944. He described Dr. Bender as, quote, cold as ice, and he recalled being dragged into treatment, kicking and biting the rag stuffed into his mouth, before being abused and raped in the children's ward.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Poor kid.
Exactly. So we're seeing sort of like the downside of being the first on this. You know, we're the first to open like this
Right.
children's ward, but also, of course, we're going to be the first to see problems with that.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever its sordid past, Bellevue has treated a series of famous names for psychological disorders over the decades, including saxophonist Charlie Bird Parker, American writer William S. Burroughs, poet Sylvia Plath, who is one of my favorites. I have a tattoo dedicated to her. And also the novelist Norman Mailer. Sam, this will ping for you as well, because following John Lennon's assassination in 1980, his body was taken to Bellevue's morgue.
Yep. Yeah, that's one thing I did know.
Mm-hmm. Bellevue had emerged from the days of medieval experimentation in medicine to providing the kind of care we see today. Oshinsky writes, quote, its clinics provide first-rate primary care, and its doctors are master diagnosticians, having seen just about everything. Which, in this case, I feel like has to be true. Because if you're at a public hospital in New York City, there ain't nothing that some guy hasn't hiked up his pant leg and showed you before.
Right.
I don't think you would be shocked by
just
much.
with the sheer number of patients that you have to deal with in any given day, that just shows that you're going to have such a wide variety of anything to treat.
Yeah, I'm sure that, like, very, very little is surprising to them. Like, oh, no, yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. That was mine.
Right.
This is actually my second one today. I get bingo now. I just won the pot.
Right.
So, having seen just about everything, which may include some of those young doctors drafted onto the front lines of COVID. Despite the scarier aspects of any hospital, Bellevue has stood strong in New York City. In 2014, Bellevue was ranked 40th overall best hospital in the New York metro area, and 29th in New York City by U.S. News and World Report. Its stalwart presence serving New York City's neediest patients is to be admired, despite its early mistakes. Today, it handles nearly 460,000 non ER outpatient clinic visits,
Wow.
nearly 106,000 emergency visits, and some 30,000 inpatients each year.
That is
So
so many.
that's so many. That's so many. Like, my friend who I mentioned before, who I asked for a little help, his father is an ER doctor. And he he told me just how many that is. Like, and he's one of those who's kind of seen it all because he's an ER doctor and has been for quite a while. But in a year, 106,000 just emergency
That's
visits.
so many.
So that's like 106,000 people whose like bone could be sticking out of their leg. You have no idea. They just showed up.
Right.
Like, oh God. But that is the story, both the dark and the light, of New York's oldest hospital that has stood strong against so many diseases and pandemics to help the public. Sam, any final thoughts on this one?
There's so much more that's not even in here too. It's just such a
Oh,
fascinating kind of progression of how things have changed over the last couple of 100 years at this
oh my
point.
gosh. It could, I could write a book on it. There's so much here. And I will be providing links to people's books that I did read who have gone so much deeper than I did on this episode. Like, we'll definitely be providing a link to Dr. Oshinsky's book, Bellevue 3 Centuries of Medicine and Mayhem at America's Most Storied Hospital. So that's for you, y'all who really want to deep dive. If you want to hear about more newer events at Bellevue and things like that, like I said, I highly recommend Life on the Line, Young Doctors Coming of Age in a Pandemic, if you want deeper stories. But yeah, I could have gone on this one.
Yeah, it's just really crazy to think about kind of where it started versus where it is now. And that's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, such a long history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about truly each stage of it is so different from the previous one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that just the trajectory of how rough things were to today.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like it's just one of those, like I said, I think stalwart is the right word for it because it's just withstood. It's like a lighthouse. Like it's withstood
Right.
so many waves of diseases. Like I think it would be unfathomable if Bellevue were to close. I would be like, what
Right.
timeline am I in?
Yeah, it would be a pretty big deal if we were to see it close in our lifetime.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can follow our show on Spotify. You can find us on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at Have You Heard About This Case at gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.